Hello artists and welcome to the epic journey. We are back today with the next video in our drawing series. Today we're going to be discussing silverpoint drawing. So what is silverpoint drawing? Silverpoint is an incredibly old technique that was used by the old masters, and it was very well used back in those days, but today it's become less and less prevalent because we tend to work more and more with pencils and charcoals and pens and so on. One of the biggest things that keeps people away from silverpoint drawing is that there's no real modern alternative to it, and it's obviously quite expensive because silver is not the cheapest material on the planet, and to buy a silver pen is quite expensive. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the silverpoint drawing technique and we're going to put a modern twist on it, and we're going to find a way to do it in a way that is more conducive to what materials we have available to us now in modern times without spending an enormous amount of money. So I'm going to put the camera overhead and I'll see you at the drawing table. Okay, so we're going to start preparing now for our silverpoint drawing. I'm just going to go through a couple of the things that I'm going to need for preparation. You're going to need a tub of gesso. Now gesso is something that we in modern times use. It's the equivalent of what the old masters used to use, which was a ground marble mixed with some rabbit skin glue, and gesso is the acrylic alternative to that. Mine's been around for quite a while, so it's quite thick, but if yours is thinner than that, that's fine. If not, then you're going to need to do what I'm going to do now. I'm going to put a blob of it into a container. This I'm just using a lid from a fixative spray. I'm just using a lid from a fixative spray because I'm going to want to throw it out afterwards, and I'm going to need to thin it out a little bit. Not much. I don't want it to be very thin and runny, because what we're going to do here is we're going to actually prepare the paper. Now silverpoint works on straight onto paper, but we need to give the paper some texture, a little bit like if you were spraying it with something with a matte finish. And that's probably also something that you could do if you really wanted to. You could spray your paper with something with a matte finish, like a sort of a clear matte varnish of sorts, a bit like something that you would fix your drawings with, your charcoal drawings with, but a matte version of that. You could spray that over your paper, but I'm going to stick to as close as possible to the old masters method, which is to actually coat the paper with a bit of gesso. Like I say, we use gesso. They used to use ground marble with rabbit skin glue. And mine's been around for a while, so it's quite thick. Yours might be thinner. Of course, different makes or different brands would vary in thickness or in thinness, in consistency. But I want something that's going to be the consistency of, can you see it? It's very white, so the camera may not pick it up. But it's not, it's maybe it's going to drip. If I drop it, it's not thick enough to stick to the handle of the paintbrush that I've got here. But it is also not necessarily going to soak my paper and make it incredibly watery, because that's one thing that, the paper that we're going to be using is not watercolor paper. So, or the paper that I'm going to be using here is not watercolor paper, so it's not necessarily going to survive the water very well. So we don't want a lot of water. Okay, so that's going to be your little tub. Now this, because it's an acrylic medium, you can now color this if you want to. You can put something into it to make it a gray, because silverpoint is a lovely dark gray, so you might want to make this a sort of a lighter gray so that you can start getting some graduation in your drawing. But if you do that, if you're going to add pigment to your gesso, then make sure it's acrylic pigment, not an oil pigment, because gesso is a water-based product. Alright, so we're going to need our little bit of gesso, we're going to need a nice rough paintbrush, and we're going to need our paper. I'm just using a Pro Art Amadeo paper that's got quite a bit of tooth on it. It's not very smooth. And I've got a little piece of just plain foolscap line paper here, which I will show you what to do with in a minute. But before I get to the actual preparation of it, let me talk to you a little bit about the actual silverpoint. Now, like I said to you earlier on, silverpoint is an incredibly expensive thing to buy, and I've got to admit that in my travels I've never actually found a silverpoint pencil or silverpoint pen. So I've come up with a really, really good solution to the problem. What I have here, if you can see this piece of wire that I've twisted around itself. Now this is silver flux. Now this, of course, you can get this at the hardware store, and what it is it's silver that has been tempered with flux, so it's really, really soft and pliable. as you can see, and you can do almost anything with it. And what I've done is I've folded it on itself, I've wound it around itself, and then I've threaded it through an old pencil just so that I've got, you know, I can grip it like as if it was a pencil. The tip, as you can see, is blunt. I want it to be blunt. You know, I don't want this to scratch right through my paper, so I want it to be blunt. So that's an alternative to buying an actual silver point pencil that, number one, is going to cost you the earth, and number two, is incredibly difficult to find. I don't know how difficult it is to find in other countries, but certainly in South Africa, I've never yet been able to find one. So let's get on to the preparation. I'm going to move this out of the way. So I'm just using a small little piece of paper. Of course, you can use any paper you like, whatever size you like. The one I'm using is relatively thick, so that's why I've chosen to use this one. What I do think, however, is this has got quite a bit of tooth into it. As you may have seen from some of my other videos, I'm not a big fan of heavy tooth paper. However, because this is silver point and because we're going to be coating it, I don't think it's going to be all that problematic. So we're just going to coat our paper. Like I say, you can put some pigment into this if you want it to be a color. Now, why do we coat our paper with gesso? Well, the main reason for that is because we want to give a little bit of a gritty surface, because you want the silver point to have something a little bit abrasive. You could also sprinkle some fine silica sand over this. You know, you could put silica sand into your gesso mixture. That is something that artists do as well, because that'll also give a nice gritty finish to it. Okay, so we just do a nice even coat over the paper. Now we're going to come to this piece of scrap paper that I've got here. Now I would have wiped it with my hands, but then of course you're going to get gesso all over your hand. I want to smooth it out. So I'm just going to wipe it down. And the reason I'm using paper is because if you use a cloth, then you're going to get all kinds of lint stuck in your paper. So a piece of scrap soft paper, softish paper, is going to be just fine. So what I've done there is I've actually just squeezed the gesso into the tooth of the paper. Now I'm just going to go over it again very lightly. I haven't got a lot of gesso here on the second coat, and of course the initial coat of gesso is not dry yet. That doesn't matter, because all I'm doing is giving this paper a rough surface for the silver point to grip onto. And as you can see, because my gesso is not terribly wet, my paper is not responding by crinkling up. If it was very wet, my paper might have not liked it very much. It's really difficult to grip when you're coating the entire piece of paper. And of course I've got a small piece of paper here, so I don't have a lot of extra to hold on to. I'm going to go off camera now, and I'm just going to wave it dry with a hairdryer. You could leave it until tomorrow if you want to, but of course I want to carry on drawing now, so I'm going to go and dry it with a hairdryer, and I will see you in a minute. Okay, I'm back. I've got my piece of paper that's now nice and dry with my first coat of gesso onto it. I'm just going to put that aside for a little bit. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put some texture onto the paper, because it's still a little bit too smooth. So I've gone back to my pot of gesso, my leftovers in there, and I'm adding to it about a half a teaspoon or so of salt. Now, why salt? Because simply this is a relatively coarse salt. It's not sea salt sort of coarseness. Now at this stage of it, you can add silica sand if you want to. It's going to go a little bit thicker now, so I'm going to need to put a bit of extra water into it. So I've added some water, so I'm back to my consistency that I wanted before. Let's check to see if I've got enough salt into it. Yeah, I'm getting a bit of grit in there. Right. Now you'll find that this is much grittier than the plain gesso. So let's go back to the paper. And we do another coat of gesso on it. So now we'll have a nice gritty surface. I'm going to go one step further as well. I'm going to take a bit of salt. Now, if you can see, this is not very fine salt, and it's not coarse sea salt either. It's sort of somewhere in between, so it gives us a nice grittiness. I'm just going to sprinkle it over. Just evenly sprinkle it over. Now the nice thing about salt as well is that it has really great preservation qualities, so it's not going to interfere in any way. Now we just brush off the excess, and what is there we work into that layer of wet gesso. And I have a hair on my paper. Let's get rid of that. So now we've got a nice rough surface, a bit sandpapery. And after this is dry, we'll be ready to draw. After I clean up my table, of course. Okay, so that's my piece of paper now coated. Now I'm just going to rub my hand over it with the flat of my hand just to get some of the loose salt off of it that might still be attached. I just dried it with a hairdryer because I just was impatient, but of course you can just leave it to dry naturally. And I've got a really nice gritty surface now. As I run my hand over it, it feels quite sandpapery. Now, of course, if you don't want to go through this process, you can always just go to your art shop and buy charcoal drawing paper. Very expensive, though. This is a much cheaper way to do it. Okay, so some of the salt has come off. Let's just brush that away. And there we have it. We can now start doing some drawing. So now let's have a look and see what difference it made, whether we drew on plain paper or treated paper. So here on my left I have the plain paper, and on my right I have the treated paper. Now I've just chosen to go with white gesso. You might have wanted to put some pigment into it. You could have put a tiny blob of ink or a little bit of acrylic paint into yours. So let's see. Now, is the camera picking that up? You see we're getting a grayness on there that's probably in the region of about a 2H pencil. It's quite grey, although it's quite soft. You know, the silver point is actually really soft, and you might be able to see it. The camera might pick it up. That as I'm drawing, so this little tip here that I'm drawing with is becoming quite silver because I'm wearing it off onto the paper. Now let's see what that does on. Oh, really? Hey, you just cannot compare. See how much darker it is because the paper is more abrasive, so it's accepting more of the silver point. So let's get rid of our untreated piece of paper, and the rest of the drawing process is exactly the same as it would be with a pencil. You're going to be able to draw lines, you're going to be able to get nice deep shading. But it's the quality of the grayness. This is the kind of the color that you're getting here is unlike any other color that you're going to get with any other sort of pencil. It might look like a pencil drawing initially, and it's supposed to look like a pencil drawing. But the color that you get there, the shininess that comes off of it, and the quality of the color of the silver is unlike any pencil can ever give you. It's a beautiful, beautiful medium to draw with. And you can get some nice smooth gradients as well. Now I'm really not putting a heck of a lot of pressure on here. Maybe a little more than what I might with a pencil. And I'm doing exactly the same thing as I would do with a pencil and go in opposite directions to get a smooth, even finish. And that's it, folks. That is how to prepare and draw with silver point, your own homemade method of doing it.